because a lot of us want certain things out of life, and sometimes we get stuck in certain ruts, stuck by certain decisions. We feel trapped by certain things, and we kind of look at the landscape of our life, and we don't like certain things that we see. And oftentimes, those outcomes of decisions can be traced back to an inception of choices. Does that make sense? And that's kind of where we've been. And so last week, we talked about the proper approach to our thought life. Because most of us, if we're being honest, we get kind of caught off guard by certain thoughts, right? Like, oh, this thought snuck up on me. It's like we don't see it coming, even though we know we don't see it coming, right? It's like you drive by Krispy Kreme and the hot donuts now sign is on. You're like, man, I didn't see this thought coming, but now I feel like I could eat my body weight in donuts, right? Like it just hits you. For some of us, right, we got real. It was, oh man, I had a lustful thought pop up. I didn't see that coming. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, you probably had 1,000 at this point. Like, you didn't see it coming. You know what I mean? Like, are you kidding me? Or it's like, oh, I was on Instagram and I had a thought of jealousy. Well, it's like, well, dude, that's what you do on Instagram, right? You compare your regular life to everybody else's highlight reel, right? And we know certain thoughts are coming, but for some reason, we don't approach them strategically, or what I would even say wisely. And so Paul laid out for us last week, because that's kind of who we've been following, is this teachings of this man named Paul. We're going to unpack some of that in just a minute. And he kind of laid out for us this idea that we're to wage war against these thoughts, because through Christ we have this dynamic power to demolish strongholds that kind of hold us back. But it starts right here, because he says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And this week, he's going to lay out for us in another book kind of the pathway for, here are the lanes we should be thinking on, right? If we know that our thinking impacts our choices, then we know to approach our thinking seriously and wisely, rooted in God's truth, right? As we said last week, right? We measure every thought we get against every truth God gives. So if we know to approach it like that, where do we go from here? So what do we actually think about? And why is that important, right? Like, why would it be important for us to dive in to Scripture and even really focus what our thoughts should be on? So consider this reality. Our thoughts impact our choices and our voices. Meaning, our thoughts can determine how we speak and how we live. And so if our thoughts impact our choices and our voices, we know the way we speak and the way we live can either lead us in the direction of God's priorities, His character, and freedom that we have in Christ, or they can lead us in the direction of selfishness, sin, shame, and destruction. And that is not the life God wants for us. And so tonight, we're going to be looking at what we should focus on in our thinking, in our thought life, because what we focus on is where our feet go. So you can turn there in your Bible, or if you have your phone, whatever it is. We'll also have it on the screen for you. But tonight, we're going to be in a book called Philippians. And to give you some context, if you're looking it up, it's Philippians 4, verses 8 through 9. Just two simple verses that we're going to be camping out in tonight in our conversation. But to give you some context, right, Paul, there's this man who existed a couple thousand years ago. He lived, and initially, Paul, right, if you're familiar with the Bible in certain senses, you will know that Paul was on the opposite side of Christianity for quite some time. In fact, he would legitimately persecute them, and was a part of kind of these campaigns that would essentially lead to the deaths of many Jesus followers. And one day he's on a trip, God intervenes, has a moment with him, changes his life, and chooses to follow after Christ. He chooses to follow after God. And in that moment, he took all of his motivation, his intention, his energy, and his efforts that were against the way of Jesus, and he turned it in the direction of spreading the gospel to as many people as he could. And so essentially what he did was he went on what you and I would call missions trips, where he would essentially go to places to build churches, to plant churches. And it's different than modern day church planting, right? It's not like he went and he rented a room at a local high school and they put out some A-frame signs in the community and they had an Easter egg hunt and whatever. That's not how he planted churches, right? He would go to these places and he would have conversations with people. He would be preaching the gospel. He would be teaching the truth of Jesus. And he would build up leaders in these churches. And then he would move on to another area as he kind of built up leaders, elders, pastors, as you would call it, to lead these churches in these areas. And he was this kind of itinerant church planter, essentially setting up a network of churches that would take it from where Jesus had left his disciples to the world. And so where we're at in the book of Philippians is Paul. Basically, he's kind of taken some buddies with him, right? Some cohorts in ministry, church planting with him. Men like Silas. If you know me, I'm partial to that name. In fact, that's why we named our son Silas, because Silas was one of the men who traveled with Paul, and it says in the New Testament, some of these men who turned the world upside down for the sake of the gospel. So Paul's with friends like Silas, Timothy, who there are books in your New Testament. Timothy, right? You're familiar with some of these names. And some people think he was even traveling with a man named Luke, who, if you're familiar, is one of Jesus' actual disciples. And so here's Paul in this incredible company, and they would go places, and they would be planting churches. And what they did is they went to a place called Philippi. You and I would just know this. Think Greece. And he set up a church. And what happens is he goes and sets up a church, and then he moves on, right, to go plant another church. And eventually what would happen, and he would have this happen to him a few times, is he would find himself in prison. He would be thrown in jail for essentially spreading the gospel. And so he's writing a letter, and it's such a joyful letter, which is kind of nuts because he's literally in prison when he's writing this letter. And he's writing this letter to the people of the church in Philippi. So it wasn't necessarily one of those letters that was like, hey, here's a blanket thing for every church in the church planting network of Paul, right? It was specifically to express some gratitude and to talk about the joy of following Jesus and the joys of surrendering to his priorities and his character and telling people about Jesus to spread the gospel. He's doing that from a prison cell. I mean, can you even, it's hard for us to even fathom that. I have a buddy of mine, and he spent about a decade of his life in prison. And he told me once, he said, when I read Paul's writings and certain letters that he wrote to certain churches, I know without knowing that he's probably in prison when he wrote that because he was a little bit more emotional. He said, when you're in prison and you have family and friends come to visit you, or you write friends and family, you're so emotional because it's so rare that you get that opportunity. And sometimes we will read the teachings of Paul and forget the realities of the personal emotions that are involved with a man who is in prison. And so he gets to share with people he dearly loves, people he ministered with, people he trained, he taught, he raised up to spread the gospel. In fact, it's the most important mission in the history of humanity, and he was doing that with people along the way. And when he's in prison, he's remembering them, he's thinking of them, he's teaching them through these letters. And so he's doing that to this church in Philippi, which most people actually believe, most historians and theologians that will look back on church history and kind of the history of the Bible, most believe that this church in Philippi was actually the first church ever established on the European continent, which is an interesting thought when you think about the history of Christianity and how it made its way to America, because for centuries to come, it would eventually spread its way across the Atlantic right here to us. So little did you know, you had so much in common and such a connection to the first church ever planted on the European continent that we're actually going to be reading Paul's words to that church tonight. So it's an interesting connection that we have, and this is what he says in Philippians 4, 8 through 9. He says, finally, brothers and sisters. I love that because he's like, finally, he's written. He's like, look, I'm going to wrap it up, and I really want to leave you with this, and I really want you to get this. Right? Like if you've ever been with friends or with family, maybe you hadn't seen them for a while, maybe it was just the holidays, Maybe you got to see friends and family, and when it was time for them to go, you hugged them just a little bit longer, right? In the South, we call it a Southern hug, a Southern goodbye, right? It lingers, right? It takes you 15 minutes to say goodbye to somebody because one more hug, right? And so in this moment, right, he's saying, finally, brothers and sisters, I want you to get what I'm saying, so we're going to focus on it here. He says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable or honorable in some translations, if anything is praiseworthy or excellent of God, worthy of praise, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice. He's saying, listen, these teachings that I've given you, the way we've lived, the way we have displayed the gospel through our choices, right? If you've seen any of these things that line up with whatever is true and noble and right and pure and lovely and honorable and excellent and praiseworthy, if you see these things, put these things into practice. Don't just keep them here, take them here. And the God of peace will be with you. Look at this list of things that he lays out. But when we look at this list, we see essentially, right, true, noble, right, pure, lovely, honorable, admirable, praiseworthy, excellent. Essentially, what he's doing when you look through that list is he's highlighting some of the attributes of God. And what he's saying is, I want you to think on the character of God, the priorities of God, the person of God, the person of Jesus, right? He's saying, listen, this is the example. These are the attributes. This is what we focus on. In fact, the word think, right? You and I will just glaze over that. In our Bibles, we'll just kind of think about it. Got it. I think about it. Yeah, right? You do that all the time. Yeah, I'll think about it. Oh, I'll think about it. Oh, there it goes. The thought has gone, right? No. The word in its original language, think, that he uses, it basically means to ponder or to consider, or some would say to value or to give proper weight to. He's essentially saying, he's like, listen, not just focus on these things, not just merely think about them for a moment and let them go. No, he's saying, I want you to value these things, give weight to these things, ponder these things, mull over these things. In fact, let these things marinate in your spirit so they can resonate in your mind. Because he's saying, when you do this, you're going to experience the person of God and the relationship with God that he wants for you, because you have to remember the context that he's in. And he outlines for them a truth that most of us know without knowing, so I'll remind us tonight, and it's simply this. What we value in our minds manifests in our lives. Think about it. What we value in our minds manifests in our lives. I'll give you an example. Our daughter just dyed her hair purple yesterday. So I didn't get to see her yesterday, but for maybe a minute, and she hadn't done that yet. And so this morning, she woke up and she came and saw me, and her hair was purple. And I was like, whoa, Goose, that's nuts. That looks really cool. And she did it because she's into this show or movie or something called The Descendants, and she really likes that. And so we were having a conversation. She's telling me all about the movie. Apparently there's a bunch of them and what it's all about. And we're big Disney dorks, so we're kind of into that. And it reminded me of moments that I have spent with my daughter that have highlighted what matters most to me. And I remember it was a few years ago, she went through a My Little Pony phase. Do you know what My Little Pony is? I don't know if that's still a thing, but she went through a My Little Pony phase. And so we learned all of them, right? Twilight Sparkle, Rainbow Dash, Shutterfly, I think that's a book thing, or Flutterfly, or whoever it is, right? Rarity was my favorite. So we got the glasses, we got the My Little Ponies, and I would spend time with her in her room. She would come in, Dad, you want to play My Little Ponies with me? Now, I'm going to be honest with you. As a man in his 30s, no, I don't want to play My Little Pony. But I love my daughter, so when she would ask, Dad, do you want to play My Little Pony with me? The answer was, yeah, let's do it. I get to be Rarity. And I'd hop them up, and they would fly. And because I'm really tall, I could make them fly even taller, right? Like, it was awesome. And I got to brush their hair because they came with a little special brush, and it was really cool. And one of them, you got to like dunk in cold water, and it would change colors. You dunked it back in warm water, and it would change more colors. And I really liked that one. And so I was on cold water duty, so I'd have to run and fill up a bowl with ice and put water in it and bring it back. And so we could do that. And we had such a great time. And she got matching earrings, like My Little Pony earrings that were sticker earrings. You just stick them on, right? And so we were playing one day, and she wanted me to have the Twilight Sparkle earrings. And I said, well, great, baby, put them on. Let's do this. I have no shame. I love my daughter. My wife is hot. I have no need to prove anything to anybody. So I was like, you can earring me up, girl, whatever you want. Twilight Sparkle, Rainbow Dash, I don't even care. Put it on there. Put a few of them on there. I don't even care. So that afternoon, we're playing. I got home from work, and we're playing. And she puts these earrings on, and we're playing, and we're watching the show at the same time, and we're having a blast. Well, later on, I had to go speak at a men's event. And it was basically a group of about 500 dudes. So it's a room of testosterone and machismo, right? And I had to go speak at this men's event. Now, on the surface, that probably looks great, right? I'm about 6 foot tall. I work out. I have a beard. My voice is fairly deep. So I can usually turn it up at a men's event, right? It's like, let's do this, fellas. Let's do this. Y'all don't know I was just playing with My Little Ponies, but I'm here to talk about Jesus, right? And so I went to this men's event, and I go, and I'm sound checking, right? And they're hooking me up to this stuff, and we're going over everything. And it gets ready to start, and kind of the music's going. And one of the guys just kind of, I can see him out of the corner of my eye, right? I'm in the back just kind of doing my thing, being a weirdo, right? Going over my message in my head, which looks weird from afar because you're kind of just looking like you're talking to yourself, right? And you're that guy who's like at the bus stop wigging out. And so they can see you, right? And so a guy starts coming up to me, and I could see him out of the corner of my eye. And I'm like, dude, what's this guy about to do? Like, I'm just used to people probably coming up and being like, hey, are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay, man. I'm just getting in the zone, right? I'm pre-gaming, man. I'm just pre-gaming. Like, let me have my space. Well, he comes up to me, and he puts his hand on my shoulder. And then I was like, man, this guy's about to pray for me. What a sweet moment, right? Like, because that'll happen sometimes. If I go speak somewhere, there's always that one person who's like, hey, can I pray for you? I'm like, man, that's so sweet. Yes, please. You don't have to touch me, but yes, thank you for praying for me, right? And I think in this moment, right, he's about to pray over me, and instead, he gets really close to my face. And I'm like, now I'm uncomfortable. And he says something in my ear. And I was a little thrown off because I'm not used to that. And I was kind of like, wait, what did he just say? And I realized what he said was, do you know you have earrings on your ear? And in that moment, I realized, I'm still wearing these My Little Pony earrings. I'm in a room full of 500 dudes right now, about to talk about how to be a man of God. And I have got Twilight Sparkle earrings, and I have big earlobes. So there's like 4 of them. And I was like, you mean to tell me I've been here for 30 minutes? They've put a mic on me. People have seen me. I have shook hands with men. And then I start thinking back. I'm like, some of them looked at me weird. And then I realized I've had this on my ear the whole time. So I looked at him and I said, I have a daughter. Like, I felt like I had to explain it, right? Because he didn't even ask. Like, he didn't ask. Like, he just kind of said, just so you know. And I'm like, I did not know. But just so you know, I got a daughter, man. I don't usually wear this out of the house. And so I was like, no. And so he was like, hey, man, I have girls too. It's totally cool. And he walked away. So I peeled those earrings off. The reason I tell you that story is no one had to ask me in that moment. He didn't have to ask me what mattered to me, right? No one would have to question what mattered most to me because I was wearing it on my ear. Because the choice that I had made had a consequence that carried with it that people would see. Are you tracking with what I'm saying? Like, no one had to do that. That is why our thoughts matter so much. Are you ready? Because our thoughts influence our choices, and our choices have consequences. My thought of love for my daughter made a choice easy for me to slap an earring on my head and then forget about it and go preach. No one had to question it because I was wearing it out. Because essentially our values tell people what matters most to us. So when we focus on the priorities of God, when we think on the character of God, we're able to train our brain to move in the direction of thought that will influence choices that will also reflect the character of God. And this is something, I mean, it's why Paul says right in Romans 12, he says, look, if you want to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Don't conform to the ways of the world. Paul knew, which is why he wrote to this church in Philippi, think on what is true, what is noble, what is pure, what is right, what is lovely, what is honorable. Think on the characteristics of God, because Paul would lay out for us that right thinking can not only lead us in the direction of God's character, but right thinking also can protect us from wrong choices. Most of us, we understand this on some level because we have been on the opposite side of that. We've been on the side that says, ooh, man, my thought life is a disaster, and it's kind of mirrored in the way my life is going right now, right? I'm not a happy person. I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel like I have joy. My relationships seem to just be a mess, right? I feel lost. I don't feel like I have any direction. And we kind of like follow the breadcrumbs back into our brain, right? And our thoughts don't reflect the character of God. They reflect the person of self. And we see this kind of play out, and we understand this value. Think about it, right? Really consider this. If you're focused on fear, you're going to live a life based out of fear, which means your decisions will be rooted in fear, or you'll just be stuck because you're too afraid to move forward in anything. You're afraid to open up to people. You're afraid to build bridges to people. You're afraid to be vulnerable and see what will happen. You're afraid to trust that God knows better than you and just submit to His way, because that fear is what we're focusing on, right? Just as Paul says, think. He says, ponder, consider, value, give weight to. Thinking trains our brains to focus. If you're focused on self, every decision you made is going to be simply based on what makes me happy, no matter who I hurt along the way. And down the road, you're going to end up lonely and full of regret. Why? Because we're focused on self. Some of us, we're focused on our feelings, right? Our thought life is all about just how we feel. And there's nothing wrong with having feelings, but feelings don't always line up with the truth. And so much that if we focus on our feelings too much, that if that's where we're rooted and we're kind of basing our decisions, we start to undervalue truth. And we never grow into who God is making us to be. Maybe we're focused on lust. I mean, let's be real. You guys are grown-ups. You know exactly what I'm talking about. If we focus on lust, we end up seeking paths to pleasure that eventually lead us to a place that leaves us with a void that's insatiable, that never gets filled. And so we kind of dive head first and then stumble through this cycle of chasing something that never actually fills us up, which leads us to destruction, to regret, and to pain. Because we're focused on lust, right? Maybe you're focused on popularity, or how many followers I have, or how much money I can get in life, things of monetary gain. And what happens is you may see some ups and downs and some highs and lows, and you're going to get to a point in life where you're going to look back on regret and realize this truth, that stuff never satisfies the soul. That how many people know who you are, how many people like your posts, how much people will look at your car and envy you. You're going to get back to a certain time of life, and you're going to look back on it and say, man, I have never once found the joy that I thought I would find by chasing these things that I thought would give it to me. Maybe that's for some of us, maybe for some of us in the room, right? We do this. We focus on what we don't have. We talked about kind of the social media aspect of this, right? We look at it and we see what other people do have. And so what ends up happening is we start to focus on everything we don't have. We wake up in the day and say, I wish I had this. Oh, I don't have this. Oh, they have this. We go about our day. Oh, man, again, they get this. Oh, he has that. She has that. I don't have this. Oh, man, I really want. And what ends up happening is we go day after day after day, focusing on what we don't have. And here's what we miss. We miss enjoying, valuing, appreciating, and living with the blessings we do have. We get so focused on things. That is why Paul is so, finally, dear brothers and sisters, finally, pick up what I'm putting down here. This is so important because you got to remember, too, not only was he talking to people he loved, he was talking to them about the subject, right? The topic, the idea, the initiative, the mission of taking the very gospel of Jesus to as many people in the world as possible. In fact, if this letter wasn't written to the first church on the European continent, you and I may not even be sitting here today because they wouldn't have received the encouragement and instruction from the man who planted the very church. That's how serious this was, which is why when he says, think, ponder, consider, value, give proper weight to the character of God, it is because Paul knew our thoughts impact our choices, and our choices have consequences not only in our lives, but in the lives of people we come in contact with every single day. So this week, my encouragement for all of us in the room, is this. Will you give weight to? Will you choose to value? Will you choose to consider? Will you choose to ponder the things of God over the things of self? Because it's an area that requires discipline, but that discipline of thinking on the things of God will train our brain to focus. In fact, if you're one of those who likes to lace up your shoes with a guy who gets up here and talks, and you want to do something with it, I'm going to give you an assignment, as it were. And don't look at it as an assignment of like, ooh, if I don't do this, I get in CM trouble, right? That's not a thing. What I mean is I want to give you an opportunity to see the teachings of a man named Paul, the character of God. I want to give you an opportunity to see that play out in your daily life. And here's where I'm going with this. There was a neuroscientist a few years back, right? You're like, ooh, neuroscience, that's cool. I couldn't even spell it. I had to Google it. There's a neuroscientist a few years back. Her name is Dr. Caroline Leaf. And she did a study, and she reported in the study that 12 minutes every day of focused prayer over an 8-week period of time. So just 8 weeks. 12 minutes a day, every day, for 8 weeks of focused prayer would change the way your brain actually appeared in a brain scan. Meaning that the training that your brain would receive by focusing on prayer, right? Especially if you're focusing on the things of God. Consider that, right? Consider giving weight 12 minutes a day to the things of God and think through, God, help me think about what is true. What is true? You love me. You made me. You have a purpose for me. Okay, what is noble? Okay, you have called me to a life greater than my own. You have called me to be a part of something greater than myself. I've been called into this hope? What is right? God, it's your way, it's not my way. Help me surrender to your way. What is your way? What is your way? Not my way. Your way, my way. What is pure? God, protect my thoughts. Protect my thoughts from shame, from selfishness, from sin, from destruction. Protect my thoughts. May I focus on what's pure. What is lovely, God? To see you in people. Not to see what I don't like about people, but to see you in people. To see you in creation and your beauty, and to focus as I lean into worshiping you with the way I think about you. What is honorable, what is praiseworthy or excellent. God, the work that you have done in the history of humanity, the work that you've done in my life, in the life of my friends or my family. Focus on these things. What I'm saying is, people who are way smarter than me have said, look, if you do that for 12 minutes a day for 8 weeks, that literally has the power to change the way your brain actually shows up in a brain scan, which would translate for us to this. If you're willing to spend focused time every day thinking on whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, lovely, admirable, honorable, praiseworthy, excellent, if you think about such things, the peace of God will be with you. Almost like God knew what he was doing when he inspired Paul to write this letter to the church. Because now, a couple thousand years later, we have neuroscientists ripping it off and proving it via science on a brain scan. Almost like God is telling us through the letter written to the first church ever on the European continent this: you want to change the way you live? Change the way you think. You want to live this, as Jesus puts it in the Gospel of John chapter 10, you want to live this abundant life? Think on the things of God.